You'll carry my child by winter. Rancher vowed to the woman who saved his life. A lone rancher lies bleeding in the dust, left for dead. But when a quiet woman, scorned by the town, risks everything to drag him from the canyon, he makes a vow no one can believe. By winter, she'll carry his child. The church bell tolls, gossip stirs, and suddenly that vow is the only thing standing between his ranch and the railroad men who want it all. But whispers spread, whispers that she can never bear a child. And the whole town begins to laugh at the promise that was meant to save them both. As the fire of greed rises, and secrets from the past return with thunder of hooves and the clash of law and treaty, two souls must decide. Is family built on blood or on the courage to keep a promise? Will a vow spoken in desperation turn into salvation or destroy everything before winter's snow falls? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon walls as Caleb Rourke struggled to stay conscious. Blood seeped from the gash in his side where the cattle thief's bullet had grazed him. His horse, spooked by the gunfire, had thrown him hard against the rocks before bolting into the scrubland. Now he lay pinned beneath his own weight, each breath drawing fire through his ribs. The thieves had come from nowhere, emerging from behind the red rocks like phantoms. 6 men, faces wrapped in bandanas, guns blazing. They'd scattered his small herd, probably driving them north toward the territories. Caleb had managed to get off 2 shots before taking the hit. Hours passed like molasses. The sun dipped lower, painting the canyon walls in deep amber. Dust settled on his blood-stained shirt. His throat burned with thirst. Fever crept in, making the world swim before his eyes. The coyotes would come soon. He thought of Sarah, his wife gone these 3 years, wondering if he'd see her again before nightfall. A soft sound reached his ears, the whisper of moccasins on stone. Through blurred vision, he made out a figure approaching cautiously. Not the thieves returning. This shape was smaller, moving with careful grace. A woman, he realized as she drew closer. She carried a leather medical bag, her dark hair bound back with a beaded band. Maria Tenorio knelt beside him, her face betraying no fear despite finding a bloodied stranger. She pressed cool fingers to his neck, checking his pulse. "You are fortunate I passed this way," she said softly, her accent a gentle blend of Apache and Spanish mission school English. "I returned from birthing Fletcher baby at North Ranch." She worked quickly, examining his wounds with practiced hands. "Bullet only grazes, but fall does much damage." Her touch was sure but gentle as she probed his ribs. 3 broken, maybe 4. "You cannot stay here." Caleb tried to speak, but only managed a raspy whisper. "Horse, gone," Maria said simply. "But I bring my mule in travois. First, must stop bleeding." She opened her medicine bag, removing clean cloths and small pouches of herbs. With swift efficiency, she cleaned his wounds, applying poultices that smelled of sage and other plants Caleb couldn't name. The herbs stung, but soon a blessed numbness spread through his side. "This will help until we reach my cabin," she explained, working as she spoke. Not far. 2 miles north of Creek Bend. Caleb knew of her place, a small homestead where she lived alone, practicing her healing arts. Some townsfolk called her a witch, others worse names, but many secretly sought her help when regular doctors failed. He'd never met her himself, but he'd heard talk. Maria disappeared briefly, returning with her mule and a wooden travois, a simple sled made of poles lashed together. With strength that belied her slight frame, she carefully rolled Caleb onto the travois, cushioning him with blankets from her saddlebags. Every movement sent daggers of pain through his chest, but her sure handling kept the worst at bay. The journey passed in a haze of jolts and fever dreams. Caleb caught glimpses of the darkening sky, heard the mule's steady hoofbeats, felt Maria's occasional gentle touch checking his bandages. The motion of the travois eventually lulled him into unconsciousness. He woke to lamplight and the crackle of a small fire. He lay on a narrow bed, clean bandages wrapped tight around his chest. The cabin was simple but neat. One room with a stone fireplace, herbs hanging from the rafters, shelves lined with bottles and medical supplies. Maria moved quietly around the space, preparing something that smelled of mint and willow bark. "Drink," she said, helping him lift his head. The tea was bitter but soothing. "We'll help with fever and pain." Caleb managed a few sips before speaking. "Thank you. I reckon I'd be coyote food if not for you." Maria's expression remained neutral, but her eyes softened slightly. "Is what anyone would do." "No," Caleb said, his voice stronger. "Not anyone. Most folks wouldn't stop for a stranger, especially." He trailed off, not wanting to speak of the prejudices she faced. "Especially half-breed woman alone," she finished quietly. "Perhaps. But I am healer first. Cannot turn from those who need help." She changed his bandages with practiced efficiency, her touch clinical but somehow still gentle. Caleb noticed the fine beadwork on her sleeve, the silver cross at her throat. A woman of two worlds, making her way with quiet dignity. "Ribs will heal," she told him, applying fresh poultices, "but must stay still many days. Fever must break first." Caleb started to protest. He had cattle to find, a ranch to run, but even that small effort exhausted him. Maria shook her head. "Sleep now. Tomorrow is time enough for worries." The herbs in the tea pulled him under, but not before he saw Maria settle into a chair by the fire, taking up some mending work. Her presence was oddly comforting, competent, calm, asking nothing but offering everything needed. Through the night, she tended him as fever dreams took hold. When he thrashed, calling Sarah's name, Maria's cool hand soothed his brow. When chills racked him, she added blankets and stoked the fire. Her quiet hymns in Spanish mixed with Apache healing songs, weaving through his dreams like smoke. By lamplight, he caught glimpses of her face, no longer young, marked by life's hardships, but beautiful in its strength. She moved with the sure grace of one who knew her purpose, even in a world that often denied her place in it. Dawn crept in through the cabin's small windows. Caleb's fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He found Maria dozing in her chair, medical supplies still within easy reach. Even in sleep, she looked ready to respond to any need. As if sensing his gaze, she stirred, immediately checking his forehead. "Fever gone," she said with quiet satisfaction. "Now real healing begins." "I'm much obliged," Caleb said softly. "More than I can say." Maria simply nodded, but something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, perhaps, or the first thread of a connection neither had sought but both somehow needed. She was a healer who carried her own wounds, and he was a broken man learning to live again. In that lonely cabin, as morning light spilled across the floor, their separate paths began to intertwine. The day stretched ahead, full of small tasks of healing, changing bandages, sipping broth, carefully measured movements. But beneath the simple routine lay something deeper, two souls touched by loss, finding unexpected grace in a harsh land. Maria's skilled hands and quiet strength had done more than save Caleb's life. They had opened a door neither had known was there. She worked in comfortable silence, gathering fresh herbs from her garden, preparing medicines with practiced care. Caleb watched through half-closed eyes, noting how the sunlight caught the silver in her hair, how her hands moved with such certainty among her healing supplies. Here was a woman who had carved out her own place between worlds, serving life despite all that would deny it. By midday, Caleb could sit up slightly, propped against the wall. Maria brought him another cup of healing tea, this one smelling of sage and something sweet he couldn't identify. "For strength," she said simply. "Long road ahead." He nodded, understanding she meant more than just his physical recovery. There would be cattle to track, thieves to bring to justice, a ranch to put right. But for now, in this quiet cabin with its herbs and healing songs, he could rest in the knowledge that sometimes help comes from unexpected quarters, and grace wears many faces. Maria settled back in her chair, taking up her mending once more. The lamplight caught the gleam of her needle, drawing golden threads through the air like hope made visible. Outside, a morning dove called softly, its gentle voice a reminder that even in the wilderness, no soul need heal alone. Dawn crept through the cabin's small window, painting Maria's worn floorboards with strips of pale gold. Caleb's eyes fluttered open, his mind clearing like morning mist burning off a meadow. The pain in his side had dulled to a steady throb, thanks to the bitter herbal tea his caretaker had coaxed down his throat through the night. Maria stood at her wooden counter, grinding something with a stone mortar. The soft scraping sound filled the quiet cabin. Her dark hair was pulled back neat and practical, her movements sure and measured as she worked. She paused, seeming to sense his wakeful gaze. "You're lucky," she said softly, not turning around. "The bullet only grazed you. The fall did worse damage." Caleb shifted carefully against the quilts she'd propped behind him. "Much obliged for taking me in, ma'am." His voice came out rough as creek gravel. "But I reckon it might cause you trouble." Now she did turn, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were direct, intelligent. "It already has. The doctor in town won't spare supplies for my patients. I had to trade extra at Wallace's store for bandages." She gestured to his wrapped torso. "They don't like me treating white folk." The words hung in the air between them, plain as day. Caleb had heard the talk in town about the half-Apache healer woman who lived alone out past Miller's Creek. Whispers and sideways glances, cruel words masked as concern. "Then why help me?" he asked. Maria's shoulders straightened slightly. "The mission priest who taught me medicine said healing knows no color. I believe that still." Caleb nodded slowly, respect warming his chest. "Tell me what supplies you need. I'll make it right when I'm back on my feet." "You need to focus on healing first," she said, bringing him a cup of fresh tea. The aromatic steam carried hints of sage and something earthier. "The town wouldn't understand finding you here. They'd assume." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear enough. "I won't leave until I'm strong enough," he said firmly, meeting her eyes. "No matter what they say, my life's worth more than gossip." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Drink your tea. I need to gather more herbs." Throughout the day, Caleb drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by the quiet sounds of Maria's household routine. The crackle of the cook fire, the soft swish of her skirts, the clinking of jars and bottles. Each time he woke, she was there, checking his bandages or offering water. Late afternoon brought the sound of wagon wheels outside. Maria's footsteps crossed to the door and low voices murmured. Caleb caught fragments of conversation, something about extra payment for supplies, muttered comments about taking in strays again. His jaw tightened at the shopkeeper's tone, but Maria's responses remained steady and dignified. When evening settled in, Maria built up the fire and helped Caleb sit more upright, propped against a folded blanket. The movement pulled at his wounds, but it felt good to be somewhat vertical again. She settled in a chair nearby, her hands busy with mending. "The priest who taught you," Caleb said after a while, "he must have been a good man." Maria's needle paused briefly. "Father Santiago." "Yes, he was. He ran the mission school where I learned English." Her voice softened with memory. "He saw how I watched him treat the sick. Started teaching me about herbs healing. Said I had gentle hands." "He was right about that," Caleb said, touching his bandaged side carefully. A coyote's lonely call drifted through the walls, answered by others in the distance. Maria's eyes went to the window, though nothing was visible but darkness. "It's not easy out here alone," Caleb observed quietly. "No." She resumed her stitching. "But it's safer than some places. The land doesn't judge. It just is." Caleb watched her work, noting the sure movement of her hands, the quiet strength in her bearing. Here was someone who knew about survival, about carving out a place in a world that offered no welcome. His own isolation at the ranch seemed different now, a choice rather than a sentence. "The town doctor," he said. "The one who won't spare supplies." "What's his name?" "It doesn't matter." Maria tied off her thread. "I manage. The Apache know many healing plants. Between that and what I trade for, I get by." Another coyote howled, closer this time. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Caleb felt the weight of their shared solitude, two souls pushed to the edges of society for different reasons. His widower's grief, her mixed heritage, both marking them as outside the neat boundaries of town life. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything?" Maria looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Perhaps she wasn't used to gratitude, Caleb thought. The idea stirred something protective in his chest. "You should rest," she said, rising to check his bandages one last time. Her touch was professional but gentle as she examined the wounds. "The fever's staying down. That's good." As she turned away, Caleb caught her wrist lightly. She tensed but didn't pull away. "I mean it," he said. "Whatever supplies you used, whatever risk you're taking, I'll make it right. You have my word." Maria's eyes met his, searching. After a moment, she nodded. "Rest now, Mr. Rourke. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." She moved away to bank the fire for the night, her figure casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the coyotes called to each other across the darkness, their voices threading through the night like a wild harmony. Caleb settled back against his quilts, watching the firelight play across the ceiling beams. Strange, he thought, how fate worked sometimes. Yesterday he'd been bleeding out alone in that canyon, certain his time had come. Now here he was, found and mended by perhaps the only person for 20 miles who'd risk helping him without question. The town's prejudice had given Maria the very skills and strength needed to save his life. Sleep began to pull at him, helped along by her healing tea. The last thing he saw was Maria settling into her rocking chair with more mending, keeping watch like a guardian angel in homespun cotton. The coyotes sang their lonesome song to the stars, but inside the cabin's walls, two souls found unexpected sanctuary and shared understanding. 3 days passed like water flowing in a gentle stream. Each sunrise brought new strength to Caleb's muscles, though the wound in his side still pulled tight when he moved too quick. Maria's gentle hands and herbal medicines worked their quiet magic, turning angry flesh to healing scars. On that particular Sunday morning, the air hung crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and early autumn. Maria stood in her doorway, smoothing her best black skirt with trembling fingers. She'd risen before dawn to press it careful-like, wanting everything just so. Her silver cross caught the morning light as she adjusted it at her throat. "You certain about this?" she asked Caleb, who sat on her porch bench, pulling on his boots. They'd cleaned them till the leather shone, but couldn't quite hide the scuffs from his ordeal in the canyon. "Reckon I am." His voice came steady, though his face was still pale as clean sheets. Time folks knew the truth of things. Maria disappeared into the barn and returned, leading her old mule, Solomon, already hitched to her cart. The wooden wheels creaked as she guided it close to the porch. Fresh hay cushioned the bed, topped with a worn but clean quilt she'd laid out special. "Won't be the smoothest ride," she apologized, helping Caleb to his feet. He leaned heavy on her shoulder for the few steps to the cart, his breath catching as he eased himself down. "Done worse," he said, managing a smile that reached his eyes. "Though I surely appreciate your care, Miss Maria." The 7-mile journey into town passed slow and careful. Maria guided Solomon around every rut and stone, stealing glances at Caleb beside her. His jaw was set firm, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning. Not once did he complain. As they approached town, Maria's hands tightened on the reins. Already she could see folks heading toward the whitewashed church, Sunday-best clothes bright in the morning sun. Heads turned as Solomon's hooves clop-clopped down the dusty main street. "Land's sakes," came a whisper loud enough to carry. "If that ain't Caleb Rourke with the half-breed woman?" Maria's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin high. Beside her, Caleb straightened his spine, though she felt him wince at the movement. They stopped before the church steps. The bell above tolled 9 times, each ring echoing across the morning quiet. Maria climbed down first, then reached to help Caleb. His legs shook some, but his grip on her arm was firm as iron. The congregation parted like water as they made their way up the wooden steps. Whispers followed them like autumn leaves in a breeze. Maria felt every eye upon them as they entered the cool shadow of the church. "Well, I never." Mrs. Peterson's fan snapped open with a crack like gunfire. The minister, Reverend Shaw, stood frozen at his pulpit, mouth working like a fish on dry land. Maria guided Caleb to an empty pew near the back, helping him settle before smoothing her skirt and sitting beside him. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of cloth and the creak of wooden benches as folks turned to stare. Then Caleb pushed himself to his feet, one hand pressed to his healing side. "Begging your pardon, Reverend," he said, his voice carrying clear to every corner. "But I've got something needs saying before this congregation." Reverend Shaw found his voice at last. "Mr. Rourke? We'd heard you were missing." "Would have been dead, truth be told," Caleb answered, "if not for this good woman beside me." More whispers rippled through the church. Maria kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, though her heart hammered like a wild thing in her chest. "Miss Tenorio found me bleeding in Cooper's Canyon," Caleb continued. "Tended my wounds, nursed me back to health. Saved my life, pure and simple." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "And I aim to repay that debt proper." The whispers grew louder. Maria's hands clutched each other tight in her lap. "By winter," Caleb declared, his voice ringing with quiet certainty, "she'll carry my child. That's my vow before God and this congregation." The gasps that followed were like a sudden wind through prairie grass. Maria's head snapped up, her cheeks flooding with color. She stared at Caleb's profile, searching for any sign of mockery or deceit. But his face showed nothing but solemn truth. Old Mrs. Davidson dropped her hymnal with a clatter. Young Tommy Jenkins let out a whistle that earned him a swift cuff from his mother. And somewhere in the middle pews, someone started to cry. Maria felt hope and shame war in her chest. The secret she'd carried so long, that the raid that killed her first husband had left her unable to bear children, pressed heavy on her heart. Yet Caleb's words held such certainty, such promise. Reverend Shaw cleared his throat. "Mr. Rourke, perhaps we should discuss this situation in private?" "Nothing to discuss, Reverend," Caleb replied, still standing straight despite the tremor Maria could see in his legs. "I've made my vow. Miss Maria saved more than my life. She showed me what true Christian charity means, and I aim to honor that." Finally, he sank back onto the hard bench. Under cover of the renewed whispers, he leaned close to Maria. "Hope you'll forgive me speaking for us both," he murmured. "But I reckon sometimes a man's got to stake his claim clear in public." Maria couldn't find words to answer. But as Reverend Shaw began the opening hymn with a slightly shaky voice, she felt the weight of the town's stares change. No longer was she just the half-breed healer who lived alone on the edge of town. Now she was a woman promised a future, a woman someone respected enough to claim before God and community. She opened her hymnal with trembling fingers, and for the first time in years lifted her voice in song within these walls. Beside her, Caleb's deeper tones joined in, steady and sure as his vow had been. Through the church's windows, sunlight poured in like blessing, warming the worn wooden pews and the hearts that sat upon them. And if some of those hearts were slower to warm than others, well, winter was still a season away. The wooden doors of the little church creaked open as the congregation spilled out into the late morning sunlight. Women clutched their hymnals close, whispering behind gloved hands while stealing glances at Maria and Caleb. The men clustered in small groups, their Sunday boots scraping against the weathered planks of the church steps. Maria helped Caleb down the stairs, her touch gentle but sure. His side still ached something fierce, but he refused to show weakness before the townsfolk who had witnessed his bold declaration. The sound of spurs jingling made them both look up. Sheriff Hardin approached, his badge catching the sunlight. His weathered face was creased with concern, and he removed his hat as he drew near. "Caleb," he said, nodding respectfully. "Miss Tenorio, might I have a word?" Caleb straightened despite the pain. "Course, Sheriff." The lawman glanced at the dispersing congregation, then gestured toward the shade of a nearby cottonwood. "Best we speak private-like." Maria started to step away, but Caleb's hand found her elbow. "She stays," he said firmly. The sheriff's mustache twitched, but he offered no argument. Once they were away from prying ears, Hardin spoke in low tones. "Got some grim news from the territorial office yesterday. That railroad agent, Jasper Sloan, he's been mighty busy with his paperwork." He pulled a folded document from his vest. "They're laying claim to your spread, Caleb. Say they need the right-of-way for their new line." The color drained from Caleb's face. "They can't just take my land. I've worked that ranch 15 years. They can and they will, Hardin said, unless you can prove a rightful heir by year's end. Railroad's using some new territorial statute about abandoned properties. He paused, eyes flickering to Maria. Way they figure it. A widower with no family ain't got proper claim anymore. Caleb's jaw tightened. The vow he'd made minutes ago in church now carried weight beyond mere gratitude or honor. Without an heir or wife, everything he'd built would be lost to the railroad's greed. How long? He managed. Till December 31st, Hardin replied. After that, Sloane's boys will come with papers and rifles both. He settled his hat back on his head. I'm sorry, Caleb. Thought you ought to know. They watched the sheriff walk away, his boots raising small puffs of dust in the dry earth. Around them, the town continued its Sunday routine. Children chasing each other through the streets. Shop windows dark and shuttered. The distant clang of the dinner bell at the hotel. The ride back to Maria's cabin was silent save for the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the mule's hooves. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rutted trail, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and coming autumn. Inside the cabin, Maria moved with practiced ease, hanging the kettle over the fire and beginning to prepare a simple stew. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, their subtle fragrance mixing with the smoke from the hearth. Caleb sat heavily in a chair, his wound protesting the day's activities. Your vow, Maria said softly, breaking the silence as she chopped vegetables. You didn't know about the railroad when you spoke it. No, Caleb admitted. But that don't change what's right. He watched her hands move surely with the knife, the steady rhythm of blade against cutting board. Without an heir or wife, I'll lose everything I built. Everything Sarah and I dreamed of. Maria's knife paused at the mention of Caleb's late wife. She knew her presence complicated matters far beyond the simple act of saving his life. The town already viewed her with suspicion, part Apache, part white, fully trusted by neither. Now she stood at the center of Caleb's desperate bid to save his ranch. The townsfolk, she said, adding vegetables to the pot, they will not accept this easily. Her voice carried the weight of years of sideways glances and whispered judgments. Some won't, Caleb agreed. But I reckon a man's word ought to mean something, especially given before God and witnesses. He shifted in his chair, wincing. You saved my life, Maria. That's a debt I aim to honor, railroad or no railroad. The lamp on the table flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Maria stirred the stew, her back turned to hide the conflict in her eyes. She had lived alone so long, finding safety in solitude after the raid that left her unable to bear children. Now Caleb's vow threatened to upend that careful isolation. A marriage without children, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It will not satisfy the railroad's demands. Caleb's chair creaked as he leaned forward. There's more than one way to have family, he said. Plenty of young ones need looking after, especially out here. His voice grew gentle. I've seen how you are with the children you help birth, how they trust you even when their mothers don't. Maria's hands stilled on the wooden spoon. The stew bubbled softly, and somewhere in the gathering dusk a whippoorwill called. The burden of Caleb's vow hung heavy in the air between them, a weight made heavier by the railroad's threats. She ladled the stew into 2 bowls, setting one before Caleb. The aromatic steam rose between them like the questions neither dared voice aloud. Would the town accept their union? Could they build a true family in the face of prejudice and legal threats? The railroad's deadline loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in thought. The lamp burned lower, and the cabin's shadows grew longer. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bright points of light in the vast western night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they shared the simple comfort of a warm meal and the knowledge that, for better or worse, their futures were now bound together by both word and necessity. The evening wore on, and Maria cleared away the bowls. Each small domestic action carried new meaning now, weighted with possibility and uncertainty. Caleb watched her move about the cabin, seeing not just the woman who had saved his life, but perhaps the one who might help him save everything else he held dear. As she added wood to the fire, Maria felt his gaze. The flames cast a warm glow on her face as she straightened. "We should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will bring many questions." Caleb nodded, knowing she spoke truth. The railroad's threat had transformed his impulsive vow into something far more consequential. His ranch, his legacy, and now Maria's future all hung in the balance. The deadline would come with winter's chill, but the warmth of the cabin and the quiet strength of the woman before him kindled something like hope in his heart. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Caleb's ranch as Maria guided her mule cart down the rutted drive. Dust coated the weathered fence posts, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. Behind her, Caleb sat propped against a hay bale, his wounded leg carefully wrapped. The two-story ranch house loomed ahead, its windows dark and shuttered. Two ranch hands emerged from the barn, their expressions guarded as they watched Maria help Caleb down from the cart. The older one, Jake, touched the brim of his hat but kept his distance. The younger hand, Tommy, gripped his work gloves tight, uncertainty written across his sunburned face. "Miss Tenorio's staying to help me settle in," Caleb announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority despite his weakened state. "She'll be looking after the house," Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, Mr. Rourke." He gestured to Tommy, and they returned to their work, boots scuffing against packed earth. Maria lifted Caleb's medicine bag from the cart, her movements precise and practiced. Together they made their way up the porch steps, the wooden boards creaking beneath their feet. The key turned with resistance in the lock, and stale air rushed out to meet them. Inside, a layer of dust coated everything: the sturdy oak table, the cast-iron cook stove, the row of copper pots hanging from iron hooks. Maria helped Caleb to his leather armchair, then opened the shutters. Sunlight streamed in, dancing with disturbed dust motes. "Been a while since anyone's given this place a proper cleaning," Caleb said softly, watching as Maria filled a basin with water from the pump. Her capable hands worked quickly, wielding broom and cloth with the same care she showed tending wounds. By supper time, the kitchen gleamed. Coffee bubbled in the blue enamel pot on the stove, its rich aroma mixing with the scent of fresh-baked cornbread. Maria moved about the kitchen with quiet efficiency, her skirts swishing against the newly swept floor. "Stay," Caleb said as she set a bowl of beans before him. "Not just for supper. Stay here at the ranch." Maria's hands stilled on the table's edge. "The town already talks." "Let them." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "My vow wasn't just words in church. You saved my life, Maria. And now—" He gestured to the clean kitchen, the organized shelves. "You're bringing life back to this empty house." Outside, a horse's whinny cut through the evening quiet. Heavy hoofbeats approached, followed by boots on the porch. Maria tensed at the sharp knock. The door swung open to reveal a tall Apache man in an Army Scout's uniform. Nantan Tenorio filled the doorframe, his dark eyes taking in the scene before him. His sister at the ranch house table, Caleb with his bandaged leg, the domestic intimacy of the shared meal. "Brother," Maria said softly in greeting, switching to Apache. "We did not expect you." Nantan stepped inside, removing his hat. His expression was grave. "Word reached the fort about your arrangement." He looked at Caleb. "I came to hear the truth of it." "Your sister saved my life," Caleb said, meeting Nantan's steady gaze. "I made a vow to honor that debt. A vow that makes her target for more whispers? More stones thrown at her door?" Nantan's voice held an edge of bitterness. He turned to Maria. "The missions taught you their medicine, but the townspeople still see you as less than human." "I know what I am, brother," Maria replied, "and what I am not. But here," she gestured to the ranch house, "here I can be useful." Nantan moved to the window, staring out at the darkening land. "There are greater troubles coming than town gossip." He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "The railroad men at the fort, they speak of more than just taking Rourke's ranch. They plan to dam the creek that feeds the reservation lands." Caleb straightened in his chair. "That water was guaranteed in the treaty." Treaties mean little to men like Railroad Agent Sloan, Nantan said. He boasts of having friends in territorial government. Says the water rights will be redistributed. His lip curled at the word. First they take the ranch lands, then the water. Our people cannot survive without that creek. Maria's hand found the cross at her throat, silver against dark cloth. The mission families depend on that water for their gardens. The elderly, the children. Which is why I came. Nantan turned from the window. Your vow, Rourke, it binds more than just you and my sister now. The railroad must be stopped before they file their claims. Caleb nodded slowly. We'll need proof of their plans, documents. I can watch at the fort, Nantan said. But you'll both face trouble here. Already I heard talk in town. Some say Maria bewitched you into the vow. Others claim she's trying to steal your land herself. Maria's shoulders stiffened, but she kept her voice steady. Let them talk. I have endured worse. And I'll set them straight, Caleb added firmly. Your sister is under my protection now, Nantan. My word on that. The scout studied him for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly. Perhaps there is honor in your vow after all, Rourke. He moved to the door, settling his hat back in place. I'll send word when I learn more of Sloane's plans. After Nantan rode away, Maria cleared the supper dishes in silence. The lamp cast warm light across the kitchen as she worked, her shadow moving along the walls. Caleb watched her, noting the grace in her movements, the quiet strength in her bearing. They're wrong about you, he said finally. The ones who whisper and judge. Maria paused at the sink, her back to him. They fear what they do not understand. A woman who is neither fully Apache nor fully white. Who learns mission medicine but keeps tribal ways? She turned, meeting his gaze. And now I am here, in your house, because of a vow made in their church. You're here because I choose it, Caleb replied. Because this empty house needs your healing touch as much as I did. He gestured to his leg. And because together we might save more than just my ranch. A hint of a smile touched Maria's lips. Together, she repeated softly, the word carrying weight in the lamplit kitchen. Outside, a coyote called into the gathering night. Its lone voice soon joined by others, a wild chorus echoing across the vast landscape that bound all their fates together. The morning sun filtered through the pine branches as Maria led Caleb along the worn path to her cabin. His limp had improved, but he still leaned on a walking stick, his boots scuffing against loose stones. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the morning air, stopping Caleb in his tracks. I should explain, Maria said softly, her dark eyes meeting his. There's something I haven't told you. Around the corner of the cabin, 2 children played in the dusty yard. A girl of about 7 swept the packed earth with a small corn straw broom, while a younger boy, perhaps 5, pushed a wooden wagon with one wobbly wheel. Sarah, Thomas, Maria called out. Come meet Mr. Rourke. The children looked up, the girl's long black braids swinging as she turned. Thomas clutched his wagon closer, half hiding behind his sister. Their clothes were clean but well worn, patches carefully sewn on knees and elbows. These are the Jensen children, Maria explained, resting her hand on Sarah's shoulder. Their mama died of fever last winter. Their pa, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He didn't return from a hunting trip. Caleb's weathered face softened as he studied the children. Sarah's features showed her Cheyenne heritage, while Thomas favored his father's fair coloring. Both wore the guarded expression of those who had lost too much, too young. Well now, Caleb said, easing himself onto a wooden bench. That's quite a fine wagon you've got there, young fellow. Thomas edged closer, still clutching his toy. The wheels broke, he said in a small voice. Mind if I take a look? Caleb held out his hand, waiting patiently until Thomas brought the wagon over. The wooden wheel hung loose, its center pin missing. Reckon I can fix this right up. Maria, might you have a nail we could trim down? Maria disappeared into the cabin and returned with her sewing basket, producing a sturdy nail. Caleb worked carefully, showing Thomas how to hold the wheel steady while he fitted the makeshift pin. Sarah crept closer to watch, her broom forgotten. There now, Caleb said, testing the wheel's spin. Good as new. Thomas's face lit up as he took the wagon back, running it experimentally across the yard. Sarah smiled too, a brief flash of childhood joy breaking through her serious demeanor. "They stay with me when I'm home," Maria said quietly. "The town council wanted to send them to an orphanage in Denver, but—" She straightened her shoulders. "I couldn't let that happen." Caleb nodded, understanding filling his eyes. "You've made a real home here." The morning passed peacefully as the children gradually warmed to Caleb's presence. He showed Thomas how to oil the wagon's axles with a drop of lamp oil and listened seriously to Sarah's explanation of her garden patch where she grew marigolds and beans. By midday, it was time to ride into town for supplies. Maria helped Caleb mount his horse, concern crossing her face as he winced slightly. The children waved from the cabin steps as they rode out, Thomas's wagon rolling smoothly beside him. The main street was busy with Saturday traffic when they arrived. Heads turned as they passed, and whispers followed in their wake. Outside the general store, 3 women gathered their skirts aside, as if Maria's presence might soil the fabric. "Just ignore them," Caleb said quietly as he dismounted. But Maria had already squared her shoulders. Dignity wrapped around her like a shawl. Inside the store, the clerk's wife made a show of counting the eggs in Maria's basket twice, implying she might be dishonest. Caleb stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed store. "Miss Tenorio's word is good as gold here or anywhere else. I'd stake my ranch on that." The woman's face reddened as she hurriedly wrote out the receipt. Other customers suddenly found great interest in examining dry goods on distant shelves. Their next stop was the smithy, where they needed hammerheads repaired. The blacksmith's apprentice, a lanky youth named Pete, snickered as they approached. "Ain't proper for a woman like that to be keeping company with a respected rancher," he said, just loud enough to be heard. Caleb turned slowly, his quiet voice carrying an edge of steel. "Miss Tenorio is a healer who saved my life. She mothers orphans and tends the sick without asking anything in return. I'd say that makes her the most proper kind of woman there is." Pete's face flushed dark red as he fumbled with his tools, suddenly unable to meet anyone's eyes. The blacksmith himself, who had been watching from his forge, gave Caleb a thoughtful nod. The sun was setting by the time they returned to Caleb's ranch. Maria had insisted on checking his wounds before heading home, and now they sat on the wide porch, watching the golden light fade from the hills. The evening air carried the sweet scent of alfalfa from the nearby fields. "Thank you," Maria said softly, "for what you said in town today. But you don't need to defend me. I'm used to their words." "That's exactly why I must," Caleb replied. He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the gathering dusk. "No one should have to get used to being treated that way." Maria was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "I never thought about marriage," she finally said. "After what happened during the raid, I knew I couldn't have children of my own. I thought my path was just to serve others, to help where I could." "Is that what you want?" Caleb asked gently. "To always stand alone?" She looked out across the darkening ranch where crickets had begun their evening song. "I've never known anything else." "Well," Caleb said, his voice warm and steady, "that's going to change. I meant what I said in church, Maria. I won't let you stand alone anymore." The last rays of sunlight caught the moisture in Maria's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. Behind them, a lamp glowed in the ranch house window, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called out across the gathering night. They sat together in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared, each lost in thoughts of the strange paths that had led them here, and the promise of what tomorrow might bring. Golden wheat swayed in the autumn breeze as the last harvest wagons rolled toward town. The October sun cast long shadows across the schoolhouse yard, where lanterns already twinkled against the deepening dusk. Maria smoothed her best dress, dark blue calico with tiny white flowers, and touched the silver cross at her throat, a gift from her mother. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his movements strong and sure now, so different from those first days when she'd found him broken in the canyon. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a clean shirt and vest, his weathered face freshly shaved. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Maria nodded, though her heart fluttered like a caught bird. She'd avoided town gatherings since settling here, knowing how whispers followed her. But tonight was different. Caleb's hand rested warm and steady at her elbow as they climbed the schoolhouse steps. The main room blazed with lamplight. Dried corn husks and orange pumpkins decorated the corners, and the wood floors gleamed from fresh waxing. Fiddle music spilled through the open windows, mixing with laughter and the shuffle of dancing feet. Conversation dimmed as they entered. Maria felt the familiar weight of stares, but Caleb's presence beside her helped her stand tall. They found seats along the wall, watching couples twirl to a lively reel. Children darted between the dancers, faces sticky with candy corn. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, approached with punch cups. "Welcome," she said, her smile tentative but genuine. "The harvest was good this year." "Much obliged," Caleb replied, accepting the drinks. "The Lord blessed us with rain when we needed it most." More townspeople filtered over, drawn by Caleb's easy manner. He spoke of cattle prices and winter weather, including Maria naturally in the conversation. She found herself relaxing as the evening wore on, even sharing her knowledge of herb gardens with the school teacher. When the fiddles struck up a waltz, Caleb turned to her. "Miss Tenorio," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth. "Might I have this dance?" The room hushed. Maria hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "Yes, Mr. Rourke," she answered, matching his tone. "You might." He led her to the center of the floor. Other couples stepped back, creating a circle of space. Maria's cheeks burned, but Caleb's grip was gentle and sure as he drew her into the proper position. "Just follow my lead," he murmured. "Like when we practiced at the ranch." The music swelled and they began to move. Maria had learned the waltz years ago at the mission school, but dancing with Caleb felt different, natural, like the flow of wind through prairie grass. His steps were smooth despite his recent injury, guiding her in perfect time to the melody. As they turned, Maria glimpsed surprised faces in the crowd. But then something remarkable happened. Old Mr. Jenkins, who'd always crossed the street to avoid her, actually smiled. Mrs. Turner, the baker's wife, began clapping in time to the music. Soon others joined in, and the circle of onlookers broke as more couples returned to dancing. "Look at them now," Caleb whispered, pride in his voice. "They're seeing what I see." Maria's heart swelled. For the first time since coming to this town, she felt truly visible, not as an outcast or a curiosity, but as herself. The waltz ended too soon. Applause rippled through the room, genuine and warm. Caleb bowed, and Maria dipped into a small curtsy, fighting happy tears. They made their way to the refreshment table, where pies of every description tempted the dancers. Mrs. Turner herself offered Maria a slice of apple, still warm from the oven. "Your dress is lovely," she said. "That shade of blue suits you." More townspeople gathered around as Caleb filled a plate. "Folks," he announced, his voice carrying clearly, "I don't believe I've properly introduced the woman who saved my life." He turned to Maria, his expression serious. "If not for Miss Tenorio's skill with healing and her courage in taking in a stranger, I wouldn't be standing here today. She risks much to help others, asking nothing in return. I'm proud to know her." A murmur of appreciation went through the crowd. Several people who'd never spoken to Maria before came forward to shake her hand. Even the sheriff's wife asked about her herb treatments for summer fever. The evening passed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and more pie than Maria had eaten in months. Children who usually shied away now tugged at her skirts, showing off their harvest ribbons. She found herself promising to teach the school teacher about medicinal plants for the winter term. As the hour grew late, couples began departing with sleepy children in tow. Caleb helped Maria into her shawl, then led her outside where their wagon waited. The night air held the crisp edge of coming frost, but stars blazed overhead in a velvet sky. "Thank you," Maria said softly as they drove home. "For everything." Caleb clicked to the horses. "No thanks needed. You deserve their respect. Should have had it long ago." They rode in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels creaking a gentle rhythm. Maria closed her eyes, savoring the memory of music, of acceptance, of belonging. The silver cross at her throat caught starlight, reminding her of her mother's words. Patience and faith will open hearts. Near the ranch gate, an owl called from a fence post, 3 low hoots that echoed across the sleeping land. Maria smiled, recognizing it as a good omen in both her cultures. The night had changed something. She could feel it in the air, in her heart, in the way Caleb's shoulder brushed hers as he guided the team home. The ranch house windows glowed with welcome, lamplight spilling across the porch where Maria's herbs hung drying. The familiar scent of sage and sweetgrass met them as they climbed down from the wagon. Before they went inside, Caleb paused, looking up at the star-strewn sky. "Been a fine evening," he said simply. Maria nodded, her heart too full for words. She'd carried the weight of being an outsider for so long. She'd forgotten how it felt to simply be herself, to dance, to laugh, to share food and fellowship without fear of judgment. One perfect night had shown her what was possible. The morning after the dance dawned crisp and bright, but dark clouds of gossip were already gathering over the town of Pine Creek. Sarah Whitaker, whose family owned the general store, couldn't wait to share what she'd heard from her cousin who worked at Fort Apache. "That Maria Tenorio," she whispered to Mrs. Henderson over the counter, measuring coffee beans with trembling fingers. "They say she can't have children." Not after what happened during that raid years ago. The words spread like wildfire through Pine Creek, carried on whispers and meaningful glances. By mid-morning, the story had reached every porch and parlor. The previous night's dance, where Caleb and Maria had waltzed so gracefully, seemed a distant memory. Caleb first noticed something was wrong when he rode into town for supplies. The usual morning bustle of the street felt different. Conversations died as he passed, replaced by pointed silence and sidelong looks. Outside the feed store, 3 men huddled together, their laughter cutting off abruptly when they spotted him. Inside, Tom Wilson, usually chatty about cattle prices, barely met Caleb's eyes as he measured out feed. "Hear you're still set on that vow of yours," Tom said finally, his voice careful but edged with something that made Caleb's shoulders tense. "That's right," Caleb answered, counting out coins onto the counter. Tom shook his head slowly. "Seems like a mighty empty promise considering." "Considering what?" Caleb's voice was quiet, but steel ran through it. "Well," Tom glanced around the store, though they were alone. "Word is your Apache woman can't give you what you're looking for. No heir means no ranch, way I hear it." Caleb's fingers tightened on his wallet. "Maria saved my life," he said evenly. "I'd appreciate if folks remembered that before spreading tales." But as he loaded his supplies, more whispers reached him. 2 women passing by with market baskets didn't bother lowering their voices. "Poor man," one said, throwing away his ranch on damaged goods. "And after losing his Sarah, too," the other added. "To think he'd settle for—" Caleb's boot heels struck the wooden sidewalk hard as he strode toward them. Both women startled, clutching their baskets closer. "Ladies," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "if you've got concerns about my choices, I'd rather hear them direct." His tone was perfectly polite, but his eyes were hard as gunmetal. They hurried away, faces flushed. But everywhere Caleb went that morning, he found the same smirks, the same knowing looks. Men who'd tipped their hats to him yesterday now turned away. The banker, who'd been friendly about extending his note just last week, barely nodded as Caleb passed. By early afternoon, his jaw ached from clenching it. Loading the last of his supplies, he heard clear laughter from the saloon. Through the swinging doors, he caught fragments of conversation. "Fool's errand. Can't even give him children. Railroad'll take it all anyway." Caleb's hand tightened on the wagon reins. For a moment, he considered walking into that saloon and settling matters the old way. But Maria's quiet dignity rose in his mind, and he turned the wagon toward home instead. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual. The October sun slanted across the golden prairie grass, and cottonwoods along the creek blazed yellow against the blue sky. It was the kind of day that usually lifted his spirits, but today each hoofbeat seemed to echo the town's whispers. Maria was in the kitchen when he returned, the familiar scent of fresh bread filling the house. She looked up as he entered, and something in his face made her set down the bowl she was holding. "You heard," she said simply. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded, hanging his hat on its peg. "Whole town's talking." Maria wiped her hands slowly on her apron, her movements deliberate. "Then we should talk too." She gestured to the kitchen table, where she'd already set out cups for evening coffee. They sat across from each other, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window between them. Maria poured coffee with steady hands, though Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders. "It's true," she said finally, her voice low but clear. "What they're saying about me. During the raid when I was younger..." She paused, gathering herself. "The doctor at the fort said I would never carry a child." Caleb wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, feeling its warmth. "Why didn't you tell me before? Would it have changed your vow that morning in church?" "No," he said immediately, then added more slowly, "but you had the right to know what you were agreeing to." "The railroad's deadline for an heir or a wife," Maria finished. "I know. And now you know I can't give you the first." Her dark eyes met his steadily. "I understand if you want to take back your word." Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, staring out at the land he'd worked for 20 years. The ranch stretched away toward the mountains, everything he'd built with Sarah before she died, everything he stood to lose. "My word," he said finally, "was given before God and the whole town. It wasn't just about an heir, but the ranch matters," he admitted. "But so does honor. So does..." He turned back to face her. "So does what's growing between us." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "The town will never stop talking now. They'll say you were tricked, that I..." "Let them talk." Caleb's voice was firm. "You saved my life. You've shown more courage and dignity than any of them. My vow stands." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet they'd grown used to sharing. It held the weight of all that had been said in town, all that remained uncertain between them. Maria began clearing the coffee cups, her movements careful and contained. Caleb watched her, seeing both her strength and her vulnerability, wondering how to bridge this new distance. When she finished washing up, Maria paused in the kitchen doorway. "I should check on the children," she said softly, referring to the orphans she fostered. Caleb nodded, still standing by the window. "Maria," he called as she turned to go. She looked back, her face half in shadow. "Nothing's changed." "Not for me." She gave him a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and slipped away. Caleb remained at the window until the sun set, watching darkness settle over his land, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges to his vow. In her small room, Maria knelt beside her bed, her prayer beads moving through practiced fingers as she whispered ancient words in Apache and Latin. Below, she could hear Caleb's boots on the porch boards as he made his evening rounds. The night wrapped around the ranch house, full of cricket song and distant coyote calls. Inside, two people who had saved each other in different ways lay awake in separate rooms, each turning over the weight of a promise that had grown far beyond simple gratitude or survival. 2 days after the rumors about Maria spread through town, the distant rumble of wagons broke the morning quiet at the Rourke Ranch. Caleb stood on his front porch, coffee cup growing cold in his hand as he watched a line of men on horseback appear through the morning haze. Behind them rolled 3 heavy wagons, their canvas covers stark white against the autumn landscape. The lead rider wore a crisp black suit that seemed to mock the dusty reality of ranch life. Railroad agent Jasper Sloan sat straight-backed on his horse, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Behind him rode 4 soldiers in blue uniforms, rifles gleaming across their saddles. Maria appeared at Caleb's elbow, her shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. "They've come earlier than we expected," she said softly. Caleb set his cup on the porch rail. "Reckon they did." His voice was calm, but Maria saw the muscle working in his jaw. The group rode right up to the house. their horses' hooves crushing the late wildflowers Maria had planted along the path. Agent Sloan dismounted with a flourish, brushing trail dust from his sleeve. "Mr. Rourke," he called out, all smooth confidence. "I trust you received our notice regarding the railroad's claim to this property?" "I received your paper," Caleb said. "Doesn't make it right." Sloan's smile didn't waver. "Right or wrong doesn't enter into it, sir. We have legal documentation." He pulled papers from his portfolio. "Unless you can prove a clear heir or family succession by year's end, this land falls under railroad jurisdiction for the new line." The soldiers remained mounted, watching with blank faces. Behind them, men were already unloading surveying equipment from the wagons. "You've no right to start measuring anything," Caleb said, his voice steady but firm. "This is still my land." Now, Sloan said. "We're simply conducting preliminary work. Our engineers need to chart the best route through this valley." He glanced at Maria, his smile turning cold. "I understand you've made some unusual arrangements regarding inheritance, but rumors suggest those plans may be impossible to fulfill." Maria lifted her chin, refusing to show shame. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between her and Sloan's smirk. "My arrangements are my business," he said, "and you're trespassing." "The United States Army disagrees," Sloan replied smoothly, gesturing to the soldiers. "These fine men are here to ensure our survey proceeds without interference." The morning wore on in tense silence. Caleb and Maria went about their ranch work, he splitting wood with sharp, angry strokes while she fed chickens and checked the vegetable garden. All the while, railroad men tramped across their pastures, driving stakes and stretching measuring lines. Near noon, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look up. Nantan Tenorio rode in from the east, his Army Scout's badge catching sunlight on his chest. He dismounted near the house, nodding briefly to his sister before facing Caleb. "I brought what you need to see," he said, pulling rolled papers from his saddlebag. They gathered around the kitchen table, where Nantan spread out several maps marked with official seals. His finger traced lines of text and boundaries. "These are the original treaty documents," he explained. "Signed 15 years ago. They guarantee water rights to Apache families along this creek. The railroad's planned route would dam and divert the water upstream." Caleb studied the maps intently. "These are legal documents?" "Yes," Nantan said. "Filed with both Army records and territorial offices. The railroad cannot legally cut off water access that was promised by treaty." Maria touched one of the yellowed papers. "Our people's children still drink from this creek. Their gardens grow with this water. The railroad men don't care about that," Nantan said grimly. "But these documents give you legal ground to stand on, Rourke. Not just for your ranch, but for all the families who depend on this water." Through the window, they could see Sloan directing his men to set up camp near the creek, their white tents a stark invasion on the landscape. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Caleb and Maria completed their evening chores, each lost in thought about what lay ahead. After supper, they sat together by the fireplace. The flames painted shifting patterns on the walls as Maria mended a shirt and Caleb cleaned his rifle. Not a threat, but a statement that he would protect what mattered. "Your brother's maps give us a chance," Caleb said finally. "But fighting the railroad won't be easy. They have money, lawyers, and soldiers on their side." Maria's needle paused in its work. "And what do we have?" "Truth," he said. "Justice. And each other if you're willing to stand with me." She set aside her mending, meeting his gaze. "You know what the town says about me, about us, about my—" She touched her middle briefly, pain flickering across her face. "I know what they say," Caleb replied. "Don't change what's right. This land, this water, it belongs to more than just me now. Your people need it. The children you care for need it." He reached across and took her hand. "I meant my vow, Maria. Not just for show, not just for legal claims. You saved my life. Now maybe together we can save something bigger than ourselves." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the darkened pastures. Maria's fingers tightened around Caleb's. "Then we fight," she said softly. "Not just for the ranch, but for all the families who need this water. For the future we choose to build." Caleb nodded, his face set with quiet determination. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Railroad men with their measuring chains, soldiers with their rifles, townspeople with their judgments. But tonight, in the warm circle of firelight, two people who had found unexpected strength in each other made their choice to stand against the tide of so-called progress that threatened to wash away not just a ranch, but a way of life that honored both land and justice. The flames burned low as they talked through their plans, their shadows merging on the cabin wall behind them. They would need every scrap of courage and determination in the days ahead, but they would face it together, their unlikely bond forged, stronger by the very forces trying to tear them apart. Dawn painted the church windows with pale light as townsfolk filed into the weathered wooden pews. Sheriff Hardin stood by the door, nodding gravely to each person who entered. The morning air held an edge of frost, matching the cold tension that filled the sanctuary. Maria sat straight-backed beside Caleb in the front pew, her dark shawl pulled close. Two small children, the orphans she fostered, nestled against her sides. Behind them, whispers rustled like dry leaves through the gathering crowd. Railroad. Agent Sloan lounged against the pulpit, his polished boots crossed at the ankle. His smile carried the sharp edge of a blade as he watched the church fill. Preacher Hale stood to the side, thumbing nervously through his Bible. When the last stragglers had settled, Sheriff Hardin cleared his throat. "Folks, we're here to address some matters concerning the railroad's claim on Rourke land and certain arrangements that affect its inheritance." "Arrangements built on empty promises," Sloan cut in smoothly. He unfolded a document from his vest pocket. "Our legal position is clear. Without proof of a legitimate heir, the land reverts to railroad use by year's end." His gaze fixed on Maria with calculated disdain. "And we have reliable testimony that no such heir is possible." Murmurs rippled through the church. Maria felt the weight of stares on her back, heard the whispered judgments. The children pressed closer to her sides. Caleb rose slowly to his feet. Weeks of recovery had restored his strength, but weariness showed in the lines around his eyes. "You speak of legitimate heirs," he said, his voice carrying to the rafters. "I reckon it's time we talked about what makes a true family." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. The morning light caught the official seal as he held it up. "This here's my will, drawn up proper and witnessed by the territorial judge last week." His steady gaze swept the crowd. "It names Maria Tenorio and these children she's raised as my rightful heirs." Gasps and protests erupted from the pews. Sloan's smile turned to a sneer. "A clever trick, Rourke, but—" "There's more," Caleb continued, speaking over him. "Maria already carries my heir, in spirit if not in blood. These children she's tended, taught, and loved as her own. They're my family now, too. My legacy ain't just about bloodlines. It's about the promise of care, the duty to protect what matters." The children looked up at him with wondering eyes. Maria's hand found his, fingers twining together in silent support. Sloan pushed away from the pulpit, voice sharp with scorn. "Sentiment doesn't change law. Without natural-born heirs, if I may speak." Preacher Hale's quiet voice cut through the tension. He stepped forward, Bible cradled in his hands. "I've watched this town grow 20 years, seen families formed by more than just blood." He opened his Bible, pages rustling. "Scripture tells us that love builds stronger bonds than birth alone. When Ruth pledged herself to Naomi, she became family by choice, by promise." The preacher's voice grew stronger as he faced the congregation. "I've seen Maria tend our sick, deliver our babies, comfort our dying. I've watched her raise these children with more love than some blood parents show, and I've witnessed Caleb Rourke's integrity in all his dealings." He closed the Bible firmly. "If we measure family by promise and devotion, then these people standing before us are truly bound as one." Sunlight streamed through the windows now, touching Maria's face, catching the silver threads in Caleb's hair. The children's eyes shone, with hope as they looked between the adults who had chosen them. "The law recognizes legal adoption," Sheriff Hardin added gruffly. "That will's binding if the judge witnessed it." Sloane's face darkened. "This isn't over, Rourke. The railroad has other means that don't include stealing water from Apache families," Caleb interrupted. "We've found the treaty maps. Your plans violate legal agreements made years ago." The crowd stirred again, but differently now. Farmers who relied on the same creek water sat straighter. Parents whose children had been healed by Maria's skills exchanged thoughtful looks. The divide was still there, but something had shifted, like earth cracking to let new seeds take root. Caleb stood tall, one arm around Maria, the other reaching to gather the children close. "My vow stands," he declared, "not just words in church, but a promise to protect this land and the family I've found. That's a legacy worth fighting for." The first stars were appearing when the shouts broke the evening peace. Through the window, an orange glow lit the sky where it shouldn't. Maria's heart stopped as she saw flames leaping from the hay barn. "Fire!" Caleb's voice boomed across the yard. Ranch hands poured from the bunkhouse, grabbing buckets and running for the well. The crackle of burning hay filled the air, along with the frightened whinnies of horses. "The children," Maria gasped, rushing to where the little ones slept. She scooped up the youngest, barely giving them time to wake. "Come now, quickly!" Through the window she glimpsed shadows moving in the firelight, men on horseback melting into the darkness. Railroad men she knew in her gut, making good on their threats. Outside, the fire roared higher. Caleb and his hands formed a bucket line from the well, passing water hand to hand. The flames reached hungry fingers toward the sky, consuming months of stored hay in minutes. Maria hurried the children toward the root cellar, the safest place she could think of. "Stay here! Stay quiet!" she told them, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Their wide eyes reflected the fire's glow. Hoofbeats thundered into the yard, but these brought help. Nantan led a group of Army scouts, their faces grim in the firelight. They joined the bucket line without a word, working shoulder to shoulder with the ranch hands. For hours they battled the blaze, beating back sparks that threatened to catch the other buildings. The night air filled with smoke and steam as water hit hot timber. Maria worked alongside them all, her skirts soaked and hands blistered from passing buckets. Dawn found them standing in the blackened ruins. The barn was gone, along with the winter hay. Soot streaked every face, and exhaustion bent every shoulder. But they had saved the rest of the ranch. Caleb surveyed the damage, his jaw tight. Maria moved to his side, placing a hand against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. "I will not leave," she whispered fiercely. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He covered her hand with his own, both of them knowing this was more than just about land or buildings. This was about standing firm against those who would deny their right to build a family, to create a home, to live with dignity. Around them, ranch hands and scouts began clearing debris as the sun rose over the smoke-stained fields. The battle was far from over, but they would face it united. The days after the fire brought slow healing to both land and spirits. Nantan mounted his stallion at first light, treaty documents secured in his saddlebags, determination set in his weathered features. "I'll make them listen at the fort," he promised Maria, touching his sister's shoulder before riding east toward the army post. Back at the ranch, Caleb and Maria threw themselves into repairs. The work was hard, but gave purpose to their worry. Together, they stripped charred boards from the barn's skeleton, Maria holding steady while Caleb worked the crowbar. Their hands grew rough with splinters, clothes stained with soot, but neither complained. The first neighbor arrived mid-morning on Tuesday. Old Jim Parker shuffled up in his wagon, a bushel of seed corn rattling in the back. "Thought you might need this come spring," he mumbled, not quite meeting their eyes. But he helped unload it all the same. The next day brought Widow Thompson with a barrel of nails she'd ordered special from the mercantile. "Can't have that barn falling down," she said simply, nodding to Maria before hurrying away. Each small offering carried the weight of unspoken apology for past silence. Late in the week, letters arrived from the territorial court. Caleb read them by lamplight, Maria standing close. The railroad's deeds were under official review, but until judgment came down, the soldiers would stay camped by the creek. Their campfires winked through the darkness each night like watching eyes. When Sunday came, Caleb and Maria drove to church together. The morning air held autumn's first real bite. Maria's hand found Caleb's as they walked up the wooden steps, their boots echoing in the quiet. Whispers still followed their path to a pew, but something had shifted in the congregation's mood. During prayers, Maria heard Mrs. Foster 2 rows back asking God's protection for all our neighbors in need. Reverend Wade's sermon spoke of community and bearing one another's burdens. Even crusty old Peterson, who'd once spat at Maria's passing, bowed his head when the collection plate went around for the barn repairs. It wasn't acceptance, not fully. But as they drove home beneath the cottonwood's golden leaves, both felt the first tender shoots of change taking root in rocky soil. Winter came early that year, riding harsh winds across the territory. Frost painted the windows of Maria's cabin in delicate patterns each dawn, and smoke curled steadily from the chimney where she kept the hearth warm for her small family. One bitter morning, while stoking the fire, Maria heard a faint cry through the whistling wind. Opening the cabin door, she found a tiny bundle wrapped in ragged blankets. Her heart stopped for a moment as she lifted the swaddled infant, feeling its trembling warmth against her chest. "Dios mío," she whispered, bringing the child inside. Tears welled in her eyes as she unwrapped the blankets to find a baby boy, no more than a few weeks old. A scrap of paper tucked inside read simply, "Railroad worker's child." Mother gone. "Please help!" Caleb arrived shortly after, stamping snow from his boots. He froze in the doorway at the sight of Maria cradling the infant, who had quieted in her gentle arms. "Someone left him," she said softly, looking up with glistening eyes. "He would have frozen out there." Caleb moved closer, placing a weathered hand on the baby's head. "This is God's answer," he said with quiet certainty. "To my vow, Maria. This child needs us, and we need him." Maria's tears spilled over as she nodded. Together they wrapped the baby in clean blankets and drove their wagon through the snow to town. The minister welcomed them into the warm church, listening to their story with compassion. "We want to give him a proper name and baptism," Caleb explained. "Make him truly ours before God and community." Word spread quickly through town. As the minister prepared the baptismal font, people began filing into the church. Mrs. Wheeler brought a christening gown her own children had worn. The blacksmith's wife arrived with a small silver cross on a chain. They named him Samuel, meaning asked of God. As the minister sprinkled water on the baby's forehead, Maria and Caleb stood proud and straight, their voices strong as they made their promises as parents. The congregation watched in respectful silence, many nodding in approval. Afterward, several townspeople stepped forward to offer congratulations and small gifts. Even those who had once scorned Maria now saw the grace in this unexpected blessing. Caleb's vow, spoken months ago in this same church, had been fulfilled in a way none could have foreseen. The hearth's flames cast dancing shadows across the ranch house walls as Caleb added another log to the fire. Maria sat in her rocking chair, little Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms, while the 2 older children played quietly with wooden blocks on the braided rug. Outside, winter wind howled fierce and cold, but inside, warmth wrapped around them like a protective blanket. Bootsteps on the porch brought everyone's attention to the door. Nantan entered in a swirl of snowflakes, his Army Scout coat dusted white. His usual stern expression had softened into something resembling satisfaction. "Brother?" Maria said softly, careful not to wake Samuel. "What news?" Nantan removed his hat, shaking off snow. "Good news. The Army has reviewed the treaties. They're honoring the old water rights." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. The railroad's claims are invalid. This land, and the creek, stays with its rightful owners. Caleb stood slowly, his face showing deep relief.
Both our claims?
The ranch and the tribal waters? Both, Nantan confirmed. The railroad men are already breaking camp. The older children clapped, though they didn't fully understand the victory. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she looked around at her newly forged family, the orphans she'd taken in. The baby Providence had delivered to their door, the man who'd kept his vow in ways neither had imagined. "We must give thanks," she said, rising carefully with Samuel. They gathered around the table where a simple supper waited: beef stew, cornbread, and fresh milk. Nantan joined them, breaking bread as family. Laughter flowed freely as the children told stories, their voices mixing with the crack and pop of the fire. After the meal, as Nantan helped the older children wash dishes, Caleb moved to Maria's side. She was humming softly to Samuel, her face peaceful in the lamplight. "You know," Caleb whispered, touching the baby's downy head, "I promised you'd carry my child by winter." He smiled tenderly. "And now you do." Maria's eyes met his, full of joy and understanding. "Yes," she said softly. "Now I do." Outside, the storm raged on. But within these walls, love had built something stronger than any winter wind could shake. A family bound not by blood, but by choice, by faith, and by promises kept. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.